the first speaker this afternoon, Maria Rosa Antognazza, whose talk is entitled Metaphysical Evil Revisited.
There is an handout going around because I will skip some of the parts in the printed version. So the handout should help to maintain the story in place with two key scholastic distinctions and then my main claims regarding metaphysical evil as intended by Leibniz. In the Theodicy, Leibniz famously distinguishes between three kinds of evil. Metaphysical evil consists in simple imperfection, physical evil in suffering, and moral evil in sin. The standard reading of the notion of metaphysical evil present in this passage combines it with what Leibniz says about imperfection in the paragraph immediately preceding. I quote, "One must consider that there is an original imperfection in the creature before sin because the creature is essentially limited. Therefore, according to Leibniz, metaphysical evil would consist in mere imperfection or the limitation of essence of any finite being. In turn, this original limitation of creatures, qua creatures, would be the most basic kind of evil and the ultimate source of both physical and moral evil. Metaphysical evil appears to cast a long, sinister shadow over God's creation, as well as Leibniz's Theodicy efforts. It seems that creatures, simply in virtue of not being gods, are in some sense intrinsically and inescapably evil, and that this partially, but yet necessarily evil nature is the ultimate cause of any other evil." So I think there is a problem here. Many Leibniz interpreters and general theodicists have castigated Leibniz for introducing such a notion. Especially students of Aquinas have typically taken a dim view of Leibniz's theodicy, due not only to the doctrine of the best of all possible worlds, but also to the notion of metaphysical evil. It has been noted that there is no such category in Augustine, Aquinas, and the Theodicy tradition which more directly draws on their teaching. This earlier tradition sharply distinguishes between negatio and privatio. Evil is not merely a negation or absence of a perfection, but a privation of a perfection which a certain kind of thing ought to have according to its nature. And this is indeed a key distinction. For instance, Aquinas writes in the Summa Theologica, "Evil is the privation of good and not mere negation. Therefore, not every defect of good is an evil, but the defect of the good which is naturally due. For the want of sight is not an evil in a stone, but it is an evil in an animal, since it is against the nature of a stone to see." And then Aquinas gives also other examples of this kind. Francisco Suarez explicitly rejects the view that every defect in perfection should be regarded as evil, precisely because if this were the case, every creature would be regarded as evil for the simple reason that it could not but fall short of divine perfection. Creature limitation is not therefore a privation. Neither are privations the absence in certain kinds of creatures of perfections which are found in other kinds of creatures. Precisely starting from this Augustinian Thomistic perspective, in an intriguing paper on Leibniz's conception of metaphysical evil, Michael Latzer has challenged the standard interpretation of Leibniz's notion of metaphysical evil as referring to the limitation of creatures qua creatures. In fact, Latzer argues the original imperfection described in paragraph 20 of the Theodicy should not be identified with the simple imperfection of paragraph 21. Only the latter, and not the former, corresponds to Leibniz's notion of metaphysical evil. Indeed, Latzer notes, Leibniz never explicitly writes of creaturely limitation as metaphysical evil. In view of these two interpretations, the first one seeing metaphysical evil as original creaturely limitation, the other denying that Leibniz's notion of metaphysical evil includes such original limitation, I propose to take a fresh look at what Leibniz says about metaphysical evil. So let's start with some existing taxonomies. The first interesting thing to note is that despite Leibniz's reassuring claim in the Trattatio de Deo et Homine of 1702 that, I quote, good and evil are usually understood in three ways: metaphysical, physical, and moral. This trichotomy was not a standard division. In particular, Leibniz seems, so far as we know, to have been the first to use the expression metaphysical evil. In his remarks on William King's De Origine Mali, appended to the Theodicy, to be sure, Leibniz claims that King divides evil, I quote, like us, into metaphysical, physical, and moral. Metaphysical evil is that of imperfections. Physical evil consists in pains and other similar inconveniences, and moral evil in sins, unquote. But on closer inspection, it turns out that Leibniz's metaphysical, physical, and moral evil are quite different from what King calls evil of imperfection, natural evil, and moral evil. I don't have the time to go in all the details of these differences, but if you want in the discussion period, we can come back to that. Indeed, if we take a closer look at Leibniz's trichotomy against the backdrop of other taxonomies of evil available to him, it becomes apparent that in significant respects, he proposes something unusual. In existing taxonomies, the constant reference point was obviously Augustine. Augustine had suggested that all evil is ultimately either malum culpae or malum pene, that is, either evil of fault, sin, or evil of penalty, punishment. The malum culpae has the character of action, the malum pene of passion. The former is evil done or evil doing, the latter is evil suffered as a consequence of those actions. This key distinction between malum culpae, which is evil voluntarily done, and malum pene, which is evil unwillingly suffered, constituted the backbone of the traditional taxonomy of evil. An immediate question raised by this distinction, however, is whether it really captures all main kinds of evil. Thomas Aquinas discusses this issue at length in both De Malo and the Summa Theologica. His considered answer is that, yes, this distinction is adequate, but it applies only to voluntary things. The thrust of Aquinas' answers in the Summa is to point out that the malum culpae and the malum pene are proper only of, I quote, rational creatures which have a will, and which therefore ultimately bear moral responsibility. As he explains also in De Malo, this is because, I quote, it belongs to the nature of moral wrong to be willed, and it belongs to the nature of punishment to be unwilled, and only an intellectual nature has a will. Aquinas is rather unforthcoming, however, on the question of what we should then say about non-voluntary things. He acknowledges the existence of a kind of evil which is not captured by the Augustinian distinction between fault and punishment, namely natural evil, affecting creatures independently of